I'm with the Office of People's Counsel. I'm the Director of Consumer Assistance. And today we're going to be talking about, first of all, what is Office of People's Counsel, very briefly. It's kind of a lesser known office. And then we're going to talk about COVID as it relates to utilities, resources, how to access some of those things, and really some of the consumer protections that are in place right now, and what might be most useful as these turnoff notices are starting to come, as I think probably this wave of evictions is starting to come. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about how you can best connect with me afterwards. So with that, I'm going to turn off my camera because I actually find it distracting. And I'm going to go ahead and start. My assumption here is that this presentation will be about 35 to 40 minutes, something in that vicinity. And then, of course, at the end, like I said, Sue's going to be monitoring the chat box, and we can kind of scroll through and see if there's any questions. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to switch over. Okay. So first and foremost, what is the Office of People's Counsel? Who am I? The Office of People's Counsel, we're actually an independent state agency, and we represent the interest of Maryland utility users. So probably everybody on this call. That's going to include your gas, your electric, and private water companies. So it would not cover public water, like as an example in Baltimore City. Now, our office is actually mostly attorneys who act as the Maryland consumer's voice in litigation with utility companies. So let's say a utility company wants to raise its rates that it's charging. OPC, my office, would be a part of that litigation, and they would be fighting for the best interest of us, the consumers. So we don't provide individual legal assistance. Our office is more of like a behind the scenes consumer protection agency, if you will. Now, we do have a small consumer assistance arm where we do a bit of individual advocacy for really complex utility circumstances and disputes. Hi, hello, that's me, as well as a colleague of mine. So many times that ends up looking like us providing maybe negotiation assistance for somebody between them and the power company, or maybe acting as a default navigator in a critical medical needs program, which we're actually going to talk about in a little bit. We'll also connect folks with financial assistance resources. A lot of times what it ends up being is kind of unraveling just like very complex situations where the consumer is confused about what's going on, or perhaps maybe a consumer protection has been ignored. So, and us kind of stepping in to provide that negotiation. Now, this service is really reserved kind of for the most vulnerable and most complex situations. And then lastly, we provide outreach, training, and education, kind of like today. We do this for free on several utility topics. So if there is something you want to learn more about that's not covered today, or even if it is, but you want to know more, just contact me and let me know, and we'll talk offline. So I think the first thing that everyone has on their mind is COVID and how that's impacting utilities. So as we know, there were several moratoriums that were put in place by the governor, of which that actually expired in September. Then the Public Service Commission stepped in, or the PSC. They're the folks that actually kind of oversee all of the utilities. So they make the rules, and utilities have to follow those rules. And if those rules are not being followed, the PSC steps in again. So the PSC put in a second moratorium that extended it until October 1 for people not to be receiving turnoff notices. I think we heard a lot of the November 15th date, but in reality, that wasn't quite true. So the utilities were not allowed to send turnoff notices until October 1. And on your turnoff notice, typically you get a 14-day kind of warning, like we'll turn off your power in 14 days from now. But as a part of these PSC rules, which you see on the screen here, they had to actually extend that and make it 45 days. So that's what brought everybody to that November 15th date. So that was the earliest date people could actually be shut off. Now, for those that had been certified as OHEP, Office of Home Energy Program eligible, they could actually call into their utility and get a 24-month payment plan, which is sort of unheard of. I've never heard of it until now. Typically, payment plans are closer to 3 to 6 months. Now, the trick to the 24-month, though, is that they have to have been certified. And that's really the kind of the key term here. That means that they couldn't have just put their application in to apply for Office of Home Energy Programs. Someone from Home Energy Programs had to have been like, yep, you qualify, and these are the grants we're going to be providing. So unless they had that in place, they would not be able to qualify for the 24 months. However, everybody is eligible for 12 months, which again is still pretty high comparatively. So if someone calls into any of the electric, gas, or private water, they are to be given at least 12 months, perhaps up to 24 months, and that with no down payment or security deposit. Again, not really something we hear of. Typically, when folks call in and they want to go on a payment plan, they're going to be asked to provide a quarter or a third of their total payment due. And for someone who owes maybe a couple $1,000s, that could be sort of tough for, I think, some of the clients. So this is really great. And they can't be refused a payment plan. Again, folks typically can be turned away from a payment plan if they defaulted in the past 18 months. At this point, though, if they've defaulted in the past 18 months, that cannot hold them back for getting on a payment plan. Now, I want to stress, though, this is not for all utilities. This is just for those covered by my office. So again, your electric, your gas, and your private water. So if it doesn't fall underneath there and you're running into complaints, I think probably the biggest one we're going to see right now is internet, right? You actually want to call the Office of the Attorney General, and I popped that number in down there. That's their consumer hotline. And so if you're having other issues with other utilities, that would probably be the place that I would encourage you to start. So utilities are definitely sending out turnoffs right now. And like I said, they must have that 45-day notice. As an example, one of the larger utilities, they've been sending out about 10,000 turnoffs per week. There are several 100,000 people who are currently in arrearages at this moment, totaling in the hundreds of millions, I think it's around $60 million in arrearages, which is kind of historic for utilities right now. Now, there are a couple 100,000 people who should be expecting to receive a turnoff notice as things currently stand. But many utilities are actually sending out information about payment plans and energy assistance with the turnoff notices that folks are receiving. I also want to mention when people receive those turnoff notices, obviously the first step, you want to go ahead and apply to Office of Energy Programs, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as it relates to COVID and how people can actually access those services. But they really should call their utility and enter a payment plan, because by entering a payment plan, they effectively stop the shutoff. Now, of course, that means that they're going to have to pay their normal payment plus whatever the payment plan is. And if they do default on that payment plan, they are allowed to enter back in one time without any type of repercussions. They have to let them back in one time. But after that, if they do default a second time, it is up to the utility's discretion. So with that, I kind of want to talk about how people can apply to OHEP right now, because it is a little funny. I think a lot of times working in the social services sector, a lot of our folks have always liked to go in, which makes sense, so that they can have someone help them fill out that application, make sure they have all their documents. But things are a little funny right now because of COVID. So if a client is behind on their bills, though, do always encourage them to apply to OHEP, Office of Energy Programs, and do not wait to get a turnoff notice. And just as a brief kind of overview as to what OHEP is, in case folks on the call don't know, OHEP is actually a state-run program for income-eligible families. So the kind of the chart on the screen here. So those that actually successfully apply, they'll receive a grant to help pay down their energy bills. Now, the general rule is that OHEP actually runs on a state fiscal year, and you can apply once per fiscal year. So the fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30th. Now, many times the office will actually stop taking current year applications in May and start the new program year acceptance in June, with its first payments typically in like mid-July. So as a general rule, once the payment has been approved by OHEP, a lot of times I'll hear clients say, but I haven't seen it in my account yet. It might actually take a week or so before the utility notifies the Department of Budget Management, and they're the folks that send the information over to the utility. And at that point, the account is protected. However, sometimes the client might not see the money in their account for a few weeks, even after that. Now, again, what you see on the screen are the new income guidelines for this fiscal year, and they do change every year. They represent gross income. So that's going to be before taxes are taken out. Now, when a person applies, they're only looking at the last 30 days from the date of application. They look at pay stubs, they look at benefits letters, wage verification forms, or if someone doesn't have any income, they can actually sign a statement that verifies that they don't. Just so we all know, they're not counting the extra $600 a week people were getting from unemployment, and they're not going to be counting the extra $1,200 in the economics impact payment. Now, OHEP does cross-check the information provided with back-end systems to confirm what was submitted. So if a client's main source of income is something like SSI or SSDI or TCA or TDAP, they will be able to look at income without submitting proof, because they do have back-end systems that can check in many cases, but it is always better to submit proof if possible, if the client can come out with like a letter or benefits letter, something like that. Now, there are some helpful forms on OHEP's website. And I want to particularly point out the zero income declaration form, which tends to be the thing that is missed when people submit their application. So again, I would just check out the website on for OHEP to find those forms. Now, when a person applies, they're also going to need their ID, Social Security cards for every member in the household, proof of residence, and the bill, which should display their address, account number, and name. There are a ton of substitutions. I don't know, 50, 60 of them for all these different types of documents. And that includes some special substitutions for older adults and younger adults, which I'll send to Sue after the presentation so you guys have access to that. I keep stressing these documents because the number one reason for denial is actually issues with documents. I always tell all organizations that if you can assist a client in applying or just even double checking that they have everything before they send it off, there's a much higher likelihood of success. Denials hold up the process by weeks and sometimes months for folks. And as people kind of start to receive these turnoff notices, it's already likely going to take longer to apply and to get approved for assistance. Now, OHEP does have surge plans in place, and they have caught up on a lot of their backlog, which is great. And they're almost up to 100% staffing, which is also wonderful. They, right now, they're averaging around 23 days processing time for applications. But depending on where you live, that time frame could be more or less. So 23 is the statewide average, but chances are if you live in more of like an urban area, like maybe a Prince George's, a Baltimore City, a Montgomery County, those wait times are probably going to be higher than if you lived in like a Cecil County. So honestly, the best and fastest way to apply is online, and there's the online link at the bottom. Now, I understand that a lot of clients don't have access to online, so they can call the 1-800 number. They have actually put energy assistance as the first option, but the hold times can be kind of astronomical. And what can be done on the 800 number is limited. The 1-800 number, when you call, they can mail you an application, they can give you eligibility information, or they can refer you to your local office. Now, there was some money that was put in that the call center the call center is actually going to be expanding their times in which people can call in, because typically, I don't know the hours, I think it's like 8:30 to 4:30 or something like that, but they are going to extend that. Now, if they call in their local office, the office will likely offer to mail the application. And in some cases, if you really express enough like need, they'll probably help you complete it over the phone or try and help you as much as they can if there is really no other option. Now, some of the local offices are seeing people by appointment. There's no list of the offices that are seeing people in person right now because it's fragile and it's changing information. Because if one day they're seeing people, but then unfortunately a staff person perhaps contracts COVID, they might have to close down or something like that. So there's no kind of static list. Now, I have personally called all of the offices across the state, and I would actually say that probably only like 3 or 4 are even actually seeing people at the most. So I would say though, if people really do want to go in person, many of them do have places where they can pick up an application at a local office or drop off a completed application. Most of them have secure, not all of them, and you can call beforehand to double check, but most have secure lock boxes that are checked pretty frequently throughout the day. Some final tips before I move on about OHEP. I want to just say, apply online if you can. And if you do apply online, make sure to submit all of your documents. I think the thing that trips people up is that after you e-sign and press the submit button, it asks you to submit your documents after that. And 80% of the online apps that are rejected, it's because of lack of documents. So do not knowingly submit an incomplete application. I know people are like, well, I only have part of my documents. Maybe, they'll call me, or, we can set something up later. It will really hold up the application. And like I said, it could be weeks, it could be months. For updates on applications, the best thing you can do is probably to check online if you have access at myohepstatus.org. If your client does need extra help, you can always call the local office, and definitely do that before, if you decide that you want to show up there. It is unlikely that they will see you, but you always want to check. An alternative option for assistance with an application would be BDT. It's Benefits Data Trust, and that's the number in the bottom right corner. It's actually a nonprofit. They help people submit their energy assistance applications. It's 100% over the phone. What they'll end up doing is they'll walk them through the application over the phone, and then actually have them mail them their documents, and then they'll submit the application on that person's behalf. So if there is no other option, that could be a possibility. But if you can, review your client's application before they send it. It might ultimately save just a ton of time. And I want to kind of leave everybody with this chart when it comes to the application of OHEP. I think that, maybe I'm projecting, but I always kind of thought, everyone sort of knows about it. Everyone already applies. But in reality, only a quarter of people that are eligible for OHEP actually apply. And so especially we're looking at our senior population. They're kind of some of the big areas that are missing out. So this is my favorite chart. I like it. This is a breakdown of what people are actually applying for when they apply to OHEP. So I think that when most people think of energy assistance, they're thinking MEAP, the Maryland Energy Assistance Program. Some people, just MEAP. But there are actually 4 grants that someone could potentially apply for. And the person has to choose on the application, whether it be online or the paper application, they have to choose to participate in each grant by checking the little box. I want to kind of run through what each of these grants really mean. So MEAP, that's actually a lump sum that will get credited to that person's account. This is the only grant you can apply for if the bill is not in your name, but in a household member's name. So an example that I think I've run into before is maybe you and your girlfriend live in a household and the utilities in your girlfriend's name. But if she moves out and she's not willing to apply, the other person who still lives in the household can still apply to MEAP in their name without her help. So MEAP is really trying to address the current bill, not back bills. Now, last fiscal year, the average MEAP grant was around $600. Then we have the EUSP grant. Now, this gets split evenly over several months, actually over the 12-month period, sorry, but you have to enroll in budget billing, which I know can be kind of a turnoff for some folks. So if you get, as an example, $400 from EUSP, you'll get $34 a month for the next 12 months. EUSP is supposed to address what they call energy burden. Now, you've probably heard that no more than like a third of your income should go towards housing. Well, technically, in studies that have been done, no more than 6% of your income should go towards energy. However, depending on a person's income and where they kind of are living in the state of Maryland, people are paying between 14 and 30% of their income on utility costs. Now, the average EUSP grant last fiscal year was around $500. The other 2 grants, ARA and GARA, you can only use each one of these every 7 years. So I always caution people, be careful when you choose to use these. There are exceptions to that 7-year rule, which we're going to talk about briefly, but generally this is a one-time shot every 7 years. This is supposed to address built up back bills. The average for these tends to be between $600 and $800. Now, when we look at this chart and think about the OHEP application, you want to almost always apply to MEAP and EUSP. But I always just caution people to stop and think if now is the moment in which you should apply for ARA or GARA. And just as a side note, also on the OHEP application, you can choose to enroll in weatherization, which is a free benefit. Now for weatherization, you'll typically be called within 30 to 60 days. And the number one reason that people don't participate after checking the box is actually, unfortunately, just phone tag. It's issues with scheduling. But I would also say that another big barrier for a lot of the clients that I've had is that they're renters, and many of the products used in weatherization need the landlords to agree. I want to talk about some important timeframes. So these are kind of a state of timeframes that OHEP is supposed to follow, and some of the utilities are supposed to follow. So within 24 hours of inputting an application, you should be able to see it in the myohepstatus.org. 45 days is how long OHEP has to process an application from start to finish. And when you have that shut-off notice within 2 weeks, you're supposed to be immediately granted a 55-day extension. The grant time frame, so the fiscal years, the OHEP cycle, that's July 1 to June 30th. We didn't talk about fuel fund. I'm going to mention it in a bit, but fuel fund is a 12 months. So if you applied in April this year, you can apply in April next year. And then there's that 7 years for ARA and GARA, unless there's a waiver, which we're going to talk about. And then denial time frame. And this is, again, I want to point to as to what I was talking about when you're missing something or something's not quite correct. OHEP has 15 business days to let you know if you were initially denied once they got your application. And then you have 25 days to respond to that denial. If you don't respond or you send the wrong thing, you actually get another 30 days. You get another 30 days to respond to that. But after that, it is closed. So if someone's been waiting 3 months, to hear back from OHEP, there's probably a good chance that their case has been closed. I wouldn't say that's a hard and fast rule, but after a certain period of time, they will close those cases. And then turn-off notices. So typically it's 14 days. We know right now because of the PSC rules that it's actually always going to be 45. But after that, they have 7 days notice before they can shut them off for fraud typically. And if they notice that there's tampering or hazards in the home, they can actually shut them off immediately. Okay, so up to PIT waivers or point in time waiver. So as we were talking about, there's 4 grants and you must apply for all 4 at the same time if you need them. But what if you applied to MEP and EUSP, but not ARA and GARA when you first applied because you didn't need them? But later on in the year, you suddenly realize you really need those extra dollars. There are 2 exceptions where you can actually go back and apply just for ARA and GARA for help with back bills. The way to do it is you have to get a point in time waiver or a PIT waiver or a vulnerable PIT waiver. And the 2 reasons why you would go back are written on the screen here. You would have to follow these dollar amounts pretty much to the T. Now, these PIT waivers can be obtained through OHEP. The best way to do this is to call your local OHEP and request a PIT waiver. It's actually a 1-page form that's filled out by OHEP, but it does need to be signed by the person who is applying. Right now, through the end of this year, so not actually that much longer, I'm sort of fingers crossed that it might be extended, but not at this point. It goes through the end of this year, so December 31st. They're doing telephonic signatures, so they can actually have people sign this PIT waiver over the phone. This is just an example to kind of further take that home. So if you apply to OHEP July 1, which is the very first day you could for that fiscal year, you have a $500 bill that you need help with. You choose not to apply for arrearage assistance because you can only apply once every 7 years. And this bill is something that you feel like you can take care of with the help of MEP and EUSP. However, in November, you have a baby and the bill skyrocketed to $3,000. My gosh, I hope not, because it was a very cold winter. Because you have a child under 2 in your house, you go back to OHEP and request a vulnerable PIT waiver to apply for arrearage assistance. So they had someone under the age of 2 enter into their household, and so then they qualify for a PIT waiver, which means they can call into OHEP, request that vulnerable PIT waiver, and then apply to ARA and GARA, even though they've already applied to OHEP once that year. I also want to highlight, in terms of financial assistance, the Fuel Fund and 211. So Fuel Fund is always sort of like your step 2 after applying to OHEP. Now, people can apply online or call in. The rule is they must have completed, and that means approved kind of in the system, by they must have completed an OHEP application and, like I said, received word from OHEP before they can apply to the Fuel Fund. Now, typically they would also need to have a turn-off notice. That's normally the rule. From now until December 31st, again, till just the end of the year, Fuel Fund has waived the need for a turn-off notice. So people can just need the assistance, apply to OHEP, and then also apply to Fuel Fund. Now, for those 60 and older, they've also waived the need to have have already applied to OHEP. So if someone is 60 or older, you can maybe put the OHEP application in, and then instead of waiting to get to hear word from OHEP, you can go straight ahead and apply to Fuel Fund if they're 60 and older. And then I would always just encourage folks to call 211 to find gap funding. It's like I said, it's not going to be huge amounts, but you might be able to run across some special funds that have been set up by COVID, and 211 has great information about that. They also have listings of nonprofits and faith-based organizations that may be able to help. It's always worth a shot by giving them a call. The Critical Medical Needs Program. So this is something that I like to highlight because it's kind of an underutilized program. A normal process time for OHEP application is, I mean, at minimum 2 weeks. It's typically quite longer than that. For those that qualify and apply to OHEP through the Critical Medical Needs Program, their OHEP application has a typical turnaround time of 24 to 48 hours. So it does make a huge difference. This program started a few years ago, but again, it's not nearly as widely utilized as it probably ought to be. So in order to be eligible for the Critical Medical Needs Program, they need to have a medical certification form filled out and signed by a medical doctor, a physician's assistant, or a nurse, stating that they need power because of this medical condition. And again, this is called the medical certification form, or a med cert. Now, in addition to the med cert, I just kind of want to highlight why it's a great thing to have, you know, as a whole. In addition to the med cert sort of being that qualifying document to get into the Critical Medical Needs Program, there's actually a couple of other benefits of just having a med cert on file with the utility. So if there was a turnoff notice on the account and you turn in a medical form, it actually extends that turnoff date by 30 days immediately. There's some extra protections in place for those with a med cert on file in terms of terminations. And if there's a power outage in the neighborhood, they do look at those and they try and prioritize those with med certs and turning households back on first if they can. Now, the biggest barrier for people participating in the Critical Medical Needs Program is they need a certified navigator to usher them through that. Now, there's no list of certified navigators that you can just pull from. It's sort of luck if a client runs into a certified navigator. Now, thankfully, you people on this call today can easily become a navigator. There are free bi-monthly trainings provided by OHEP that are 1 hour long. As someone who's helped clients through this process, it does make a huge difference. The navigator is basically treated as the point person on the application. So if there's like a problem, the navigator is alerted and works one-on-one with someone at OHEP to resolve the issue. The client does not work with OHEP to try and resolve the issue. So in order to find out when the next training is, you have to contact Kate at OHEP, and that's her email address, but I'll also send out a list of the upcoming trainings after this presentation. Co-occupancy issues. So this comes up a lot, and there's no one way to tell who's kind of violating co-occupancy rules versus another, as it's really about individual circumstances. So co-occupancy refers to people living together and then pinpointing who is responsible for that bill. So you might say, if the person whose name is on the bill is the person responsible. And you know, in some cases you would be right. So my electricity bill is in my name. If I die, should my husband be responsible for the bill since we live together, even though he's not the account holder technically? I unfortunately think there's going to be a lot of evictions in the near future. And with people moving in with relatives or having to find new places to live, I think this topic is going to come up quite a bit in the future. So when the utility tries to pin a bill on someone who is not the listed account holder, they say things like benefit of use. Now, benefit of use means the person benefited from the energy, therefore they're responsible for the bill. And you know, in some cases, this would be true, and in other cases, it would be false. At the heart of the argument, it's almost like you have to think a little bit like a lawyer. At the heart of the argument and what determines if the person is actually responsible is all about intent. So I want to walk through just a couple of examples. But I would say that if you run into any of these, just to contact my office, it might be faster and easier for you and me to exchange a couple of emails versus trying to argue with the utility company or trying to kind of unravel something. So we might hear about a married couple living in a home and then the spouse passes. The utility bill is in the name of the deceased spouse. Now, the utility company will probably then come after the living spouse and they try to put the bill in their name. They call this benefit of use. However, we want to try and fight these bills. If the living spouse can present the death certificate, the bill should be cleared. This is always the rule. If a spouse dies, the living spouse is not responsible. Now, all other situations are not as clear cut as that, and it really is about the intent. So ask yourself, is the person trying to get around the responsibility of paying for the bill? So a grandchild moves into the home to take care of grandma. When grandma gets better, the grandchild then leaves grandma's home and tries to open up her own account, but they flag her. Grandma has stopped paying her energy bills. They say, well, grandma's name was on the bill, grandchild lived there, benefit of use. But no, she is not responsible, because at the heart of this argument, the biggest deciding factor is determining intent. She was moving in out of the kindness of her heart to take care of grandma, and once grandma got better, she moved out. Another example, kind of on the other side of this, which I do see, a brother and a sister live together. The bill is in sister's name. She does not pay the bill. Brother and sister move together to another home and try to put the bill in brother's name. They're flagged. They would be responsible. Their intent is to get around responsibility for that bill. Now, again, each situation really does need to be addressed on a case-by-case basis, and just ask yourself, are they trying to get around paying the bill? Intent is key in these scenarios. And in many cases, an advocate may need to call to argue these positions. And so, like I said, if you run across one of these and you're kind of stumped, please feel free to give me a call. Weather restrictions. So this is pretty timely because it is starting to get a bit chilly outside. There are some myths and some truths out there about weather restrictions. Now, during extreme weather, service shutoffs are prohibited on any day with a forecast at 6 a.m. of 32 degrees or below, or for hot weather, 95 degrees and above during that next 72-hour period. And then they recheck it every 24 hours. And they have like a few spots throughout Maryland where they do this consistent check from. Now, what does that mean, what I just said? So here's a chart here. So let's say I'm holding a shut-off notice and I'm due to be shut off today. Well, the utility company is going to check. Okay, so today is Monday, it's 32 degrees, it's forecasted to be 28 and then 32. I'm safe today. Now it's Tuesday. Today is 28, just like they forecasted. Tomorrow they're forecasting 32 and 31, still safe. Now it's Wednesday. It's 32 degrees. They're forecasting it's 33 and 29. I am no longer safe and could be shut off on Wednesday because on Thursday, it goes above 32 degrees. So this protection is really thin. And it only applies during the winter crisis season months during November 1 through March 31st. This was really initially to, I'm blanking on which state it was initially made in, but to stop utility companies from doing like maybe mass shutoffs before a winter blizzard. You know, this isn't just to like maintain people throughout like a quote unquote kind of average winter, but if there was going to be a huge like polar vortex like we'd seen before, something like that would probably stop some shutoffs, which is why they're looking 3 days in advance. Now, so to be very clear, there is no shutoff moratorium during the winter. That is a complete myth. They still have to send you the 14-day notice in advance like normal, but again, right now, because of those PSC things, it's going to be 45 days. The extra protection is they must contact you 2 times outside of that. Now, something to kind of note, and this is again, the MedCert is great. They cannot shut you off if they know there is a health or safety endangerment. But the key is the utility must know. So you want to get your medical certificate signed by your doctor's office and turned into the utility before the shutoff occurs. They have to sign an affidavit stating that it's not going to affect your health or safety before they shut you off. And while the MedCert is certainly not a blanket protection, it does help. 7-year rule. So there's a regulation that is listed in COMAR, and I put the reg up there. I wouldn't normally share that because it gets a little complicated, but in case you ever have to quote it, that states, a utility may not refuse service to a customer for non-payment of an outstanding bill that is over 7 years old. So after a certain period of time, the previous balance is essentially forgotten and cannot stop a customer from restarting service in their name. I know it seems like these don't come up very often, but I have had quite a few people who the service was turned off many years ago because they were unable to pay what was a very large bill, and it has been 7 years and they are looking to restart service. Sometimes the utility will try and collect that old bill of 7+ years, and in reality, they really can't. They can. They have to actually go to the PSC and ask for special permission but they really don't typically do that. So if there is an outstanding bill of over 7 years old, the person 100% can start service again at that utility, but you have to challenge these bills because very rarely have I run into the utility highlighting that for the customer. So you got to challenge them. If you come up with this situation, I would say find the date the account closed and count from there. Now they're still going to report this information to credit agencies, but it's unlikely they send that to creditors, to collectors. So I would go ahead, like I said, challenge these bills. If it is 7 years old or more, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to restart service in their name. There are 2 instances where this would not apply. One, before they talk to you, the customer signed a payment agreement and says, yep, I'm going to pay it. You're right. If they've already signed something, they've got to pay it. Or if it's a result of theft of energy. If it's an old bill that's a result of theft of energy, it would also not be privy to the 7-year rule. Speaking of theft of energy or tow, it is very tricky. If the company has claimed theft of energy, it can kind of be difficult for someone to prove otherwise. Now, theft of energy could be related to tampering with the smart meter, stealing energy from a neighbor or somewhere else through an illegal hookup, fraudulent information on an application, sometimes leaving the previous occupant on a utility bill, like especially in a rental situation, or never putting your name on it, or putting the bill in a child's name or a family member's name that doesn't know. Now, when people are, what will happen is the utility company will flag it, they'll go out and they'll investigate it. If they've come to find that this is indeed theft of energy, they actually lose out on quite a few benefits. And I kind of want to just roll through those because once theft of energy has been decided, like I said, it's going to be tough to roll that back. So there is no 7-year rule. It is officially debt that they would have to pay. There's very little negotiation in that scenario in terms of maybe setting up a payment plan. In some rare circumstances, if maybe a case manager calls versus the client and tries to negotiate, they might get it reduced, but it is going to be really tough. You can't apply for OHEP dollars if it's a theft of energy bill. So once OHEP knows that it's theft of energy on the account, they're going to flag it. Now, the person can still apply to OHEP in the future, but it just can't go towards that old balance. The utility can shut you off immediately. It could be in the dead of winter. I don't think that they would, but it could be snowing outside. They could shut you off immediately and there would be no kind of recourse for that person. Sometimes our clients' bills are so big, they actually need to speak with a lawyer about their options. And many times that option is bankruptcy. But if there's found to be any type of theft on that account, it is kind of unlikely that the bankruptcy will go through because this was technically a crime, not a bill. And most importantly, it's dangerous. Tampering with electricity is dangerous. I know that people will sometimes pay other people to change the way their meter is hooked up to the wires that deliver the service. And that person might know what they're doing. But if something were to happen and causes property damage, it's unlikely that maybe renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance is going to pay for that. Public Service Commission. So as we talked about, the PSC, they're the regulatory body over the utilities. And with the new rules that have been put into place, these guys are really more important than ever. They set the regulations that utilities have to follow. And if the utility is not following those regulations, you can lodge a complaint with the PSC. So in order to make a complaint, you can't actually call and make one over the phone. You either can go online to that web address and there's a form you can fill out, or you can call them and they'll send you a form to fill out. Now, some tips about filing a complaint: make sure to speak with the utility before you file the complaint. The PSC will actually not take your complaint unless the utility has officially come to a decision. And it's always best to have that in writing. Be clear about your complaint. You know, what is the complaint? Why are you right? What do you want to see? You're kind of stating your case here. You want to list everything you've already done and everyone you've spoken to. Details are really going to matter. Now, the PSC typically lodges their decision based on what you've provided within 4 to 6 weeks. I tend to see it on the lower end of that. But if you're not happy with the outcome of the PSC investigation, you can file an appeal, and those appeal instructions will be on the denial. Retail suppliers. So retail suppliers or third-party suppliers are the folks that, if you live in Baltimore City especially, you probably met knocking on your door or calling you, emailing you, or sending you direct mail, asking you to let them sell you energy. They're not BGE or Smeco or Pepco or any of the big names you probably are really familiar with. A few examples, these are completely random. like a Spark Energy, Direct Energy, SFE, things like that. There's actually around 400 to 600 in the state of Maryland, and around 40 to 60 are active at any one time in the state of Maryland. Now, before we get too into the suppliers themselves, I briefly want to kind of walk through how energy gets to our door. But I don't want you to worry, it's not super technical, but it is kind of important to understand. So there's three major players that touch the energy that we use before it gets into our houses. That's generators, distributors, and suppliers. So the generators, they actually create the energy. There are generation hubs throughout the country. Ours is called PJM, if you're curious. Then there's the suppliers. So the suppliers buy the energy from the generators. BGE, SMECO, Delmarva Power, Washington Gas, the big guys, that they're actually still known as suppliers. They buy the energy from the generators to sell to us. Now, the big guys, because they're essentially kind of like, they're regulated, they have to ask the regulatory body, the Public Service Commission, how much can they charge us, the consumer, for the power they just bought. Now, whatever the price is that the Public Service Commission decides is now called the Standard Offer Service Price, SOS. Now, the retail suppliers, the ones we talked about before, they also purchase the energy from the generators. But unlike the big guys, the retail suppliers can set their own price, and that can be lower or higher than the SOS. Now, the distributors, they're responsible for the wires and towers that get the energy physically into our homes. Now, since they provide the equipment to get the power to our homes, they also typically control the billing. So typically the distributors are going to be your BGEs, your Pepcos, your SMECOs, again, the big ones. So the generators make the energy, the suppliers buy the energy from the generators and sell it to us, the customers, and then the distributors get the energy to our homes via the wires and towers, and they also send us our bills. So your distributor and your supplier can be the same or different. BGE, as an example, distributes and sells me my energy. However, if I like the price of a retail supplier more, I could buy it from them. So BGE would be my distributor, and my supplier would be a third-party supplier, because I decided I wanted to sign a contract to let them supply my energy to me. So I would still get a bill from BGE, but some of the info would be different. So retail suppliers are legal entities. Retail suppliers typically claim that their price will be lower than the SOS and that you should let them supply your energy. In a very recent study done in Massachusetts, over the past 2 years, people that signed up with retail suppliers in aggregate paid $30 million more than those that just stuck with their big guys, in our case, BGE, Pepco, those types of folks, who offer the SOS. Now, retail suppliers market door to door, over the phone, through email, and with more people being at home and struggling to pay their bills because of COVID, people might be more inclined to sign up with a retail supplier. I would just encourage everyone to really think about that, to ask about variable rates and cancellation fees, to really read that contract in full, and to understand what you're paying now versus what they're offering. Just be careful and do your homework. Unfortunately, we've run into retail suppliers that tend to do things that are not legal. They might say things like, we are already your provider. Let me be clear in that none of the big guys are ever going to knock on your door. That will never happen. So if someone comes to your door and says, we are already your provider, it is likely not the case. They may ask to see your bill. There's a number on your bill called the choice ID number, and I'm going to show you. If they get that number, they can sign you up without your knowledge. It's like your bill's social security number, and it's called slamming. Now, these can sometimes have hidden fees, variable usage rates, and huge cancellation fees, a couple $100 sometimes. Now, if a client complains that their bill suddenly and unexpectedly went up, I would encourage you to look for a third-party supplier charge on their bill. Make sure they meant to sign up with a third-party supplier. Now, if they did, they're going to be held to those cancellation fees, more than likely, if they wanted to get out. But if they were illegally signed up, first step would be call the supplier to complain. You can't, even though it might be showing up on your BGE bill, it's actually the supplier that you have to call directly. My tip would be confident. Tell them what they did was illegal and you want out of the contract immediately with no fees. Otherwise, you're going to lodge a complaint with the Public Service Commission. Speak with a supervisor. And regardless of the outcome, if what they did was illegal, still file a complaint with the Public Service Commission. I want to show you just briefly where these choice ID numbers are and where you can see if there's a third-party supplier charge. So, and this actually talks about sort of the three players in the energy game. So we have BGE Electric Delivery, so those are distributor, and then supply, so our electric supply. So BGE is it, and this is our electric choice ID number right here, which is different than our account number. Here it is for Washington Gas. Purchase gas cost would mean that you have the standard offer service price right here. This is where you would find it. Delmarva Power, where is it? Oh, here, standard offer service. That was the term that we talked about earlier. So this person, this fake person is signed up just directly through Delmarva Power or Pepco. That goes, same here. See, look, standard offer service. And Potomac Edison, it would be right down here. So those are some of the examples of some of the bills, just to kind of highlight. Now, lastly, this last thing we're going to talk about very briefly is negotiation tips. Now, if people are behind on their bill, like I said, I want to encourage them to apply to OHEP and try to negotiate with their provider. Now, we know right now that utilities should be offering 12 and 24-month payment plans, but that's not always the case. And we don't know when those PSC rules are going to stop being in play. They haven't given like an end date as to when the utilities can stop offering those options. So when that happens, though, these are some kind of general negotiation tips. So I think the most important one that I can tell anyone is be prepared before you call. This is a negotiation. And then if you're not getting what you need from the service rep, then you would want to go ahead and speak with a supervisor. The number one thing you need to be prepared to talk about is the reason for the past due bill. Was it job loss, cut in hours, cut in pay, COVID? Let them know if someone in your house would suffer a hardship if the power was shut off, medical equipment, a newborn, a recent surgery, something like that. Be familiar with your past due bill amount. You don't want to call and be surprised. Know your ability to make payments. If you're going to try and negotiate a payment plan and they say, okay, $200 a month, but you're not really sure if you can pay that, know where your threshold is before you go ahead and set up a payment plan, because if you default, then once again, these rules are over. They can technically not offer you another payment plan for 18 months, which is a very long time. Know your payment history and be ready to talk about any knowledge of investigation for fraud or theft of energy on your account, because if that is in play, they will bring that up. And lastly, this is my contact information. So if a client needs assistance, please do give them this phone number or this email. If you would like to talk to me directly or have training for your organization, this is my email. And with that, I am done talking, and we can take any questions that might exist.
Brandy, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and we do have a lot of questions. So let's get started. All right, first one is to confirm, if someone defaults on a COVID payment plan, they will get one more chance and a payment plan will stop the shutoff?
Yes, yes. So they can go back one more time, and that's what the PSC says, so that we got clarification. And the rule is that they get one more chance, but if they default again, I mean, could the utility offer it to them another time? Maybe, but they aren't required to.
Gotcha, thank you. Okay, are the applications available in different languages?
Spanish, that's it.
Gotcha, thank you.
And I can send both of those out. I keep offering for you to send things out. Is that okay, Sue?
It's totally fine. Yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I can send out like a little packet of stuff afterwards, and I'll include the English and Spanish applications. There's also I don't know that it exists in Spanish. Let me check. But there's because it is like a PDF that you typically need to print. There is an editable PDF that I'll see if I can get in Spanish as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll send it out to everybody. All right, next one. What percentage of utility bills does energy assistance cover?
I mean, so that's tough because it depends on what your bill is. Like I said, I can say that the average amount, so like I said, MEP was, I think was 600, EUSP was 500, and the ARA and GARAs were around $600 to $800. So it depends. Like if I have a $500 bill, well, 100% of my bill was covered. So I think it just really depends on your bill.
Mm-hmm. And how you can couple those different things together. Gotcha.
Yeah, because it's gonna look at the way they determine that grant amount is what you owe, and then the people in your household and your energy usage. So it's a very like complicated kind of formula that I don't even have access to, and I don't even know if I would. I've asked, and they were like, it's kind of complicated, and it does really vary based on the person.
Okay, thank you. All right, we can apply for energy assistance, OHEP, through the community-based organization portal, right?
The community, now I feel like I've seen this. I don't know for sure. I want to make sure that I know that we're talking about the same thing. I mean, it would just be the regular state OHEP application. I don't see why not. Like if you're applying for on someone else's behalf, I've seen that. If that's what we're talking about, then yes.
Okay, thank you. We'll see if there's any clarification on that when I get down to the bottom as well. So is there a maximum grant amount that can be paid?
So for our AGARA, it's $2,000 each. The energy assistance and the or the MEEP and the EUSP, you know, I'm not sure. Let me find out. Let me get that answer for you.
Okay, appreciate it. All right, what if your income exceeds the monthly allowance?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just writing that down. So if your income exceeds that monthly allowance, I would encourage you to take a look at Fuel Fund. Fuel Fund's income guidelines are at 200% of the federal poverty line versus the 175, which is what we were looking at for OHEP. Now, if your income is above that, then I would strongly encourage you to call 211. Like I said, especially right now, there are COVID monies out there that might be able to help. It just really, it's based on where you live, what county, what zip code, that sort of thing.
Right, and I know for Anne Arundel County, the Community Action Agency just launched a new program to help with utilities too. So.
Yeah, there's definitely, I know that they exist in quite a few of the counties. And what's great about not all of them, but many of them is they don't have income guidelines.
Great, okay. All right, can you give some specific examples of medical conditions that could qualify as CMNP?
Yeah. So first, I'm 100% I'm happy. It would be maybe a recent open heart surgery. It could be extreme asthma. It could be, you know, cancer. But really, I mean, I could list a ton of stuff. It matters what your doctor will sign. So if your doctor, what was it, physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner, it depends on what they consider. So you'd be going into your doctor and asking them to sign based on your medical need. So if they'll sign it, it counts. It could be, I mean, technically, I mean, it shouldn't be used in this way because really we only want to funnel our most vulnerable through this kind of path, because if everyone applies through it, then it'll kind of slow the process down probably. But I mean, if they'll sign it for a stub toe, then the utility has to accept it. But again, it's really meant for the most vulnerable folks to be funneled through.
Great, thank you. There's a comment that maybe we could either put this in the chat or send it privately. I missed Catherine's email. If you can post it again for navigator training. So
yeah,
if you get that, great. And then if not, I'll get it to.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm going to send out this. I mean, you'll have this copy of this presentation as well, which is also in there.
Great. All right, when you wait for OHEP to respond before applying to the fuel fund, does that mean waiting for them to acknowledge they got your application, or for OHEP to reply that you qualify or don't qualify?
So it needs to be in their system so that they've entered it. So if you go into like my OHEP status .org, if you see it in there, we're set to go. The reason being is because OHEP and Fuel Fund kind of share like some back end information in terms of eligibility. So what they're really doing is they're verifying those documents, like those income documents, right? So once you're kind of fully into OHEP, I mean, basically at that point, the process of kind of getting your approval is almost done. But if you see in the My OHEP status that your application is in there, then you can go ahead and apply to Fuel Fund. And if there are any questions, like I said, the team, if anyone's ever worked with the Fuel Fund team, they're super nice and very helpful. So if there's any questions about like at what point past that, they'll certainly answer those. But like I said, I would say My OHEP status, once it's in there, you're set.
Great, thank you. All right, a few more. Can we advocate to Maryland state legislators to have internet providers regulated by PSC? Many of these retail providers are predatory.
So they are going to be looked at through like the Attorney General's office. And so those are the folks, because I have 100% gotten some inquiries through both our phone number and our email about some places in particular, and we have to refer them over to the Office of Attorney General. They're the ones that kind of oversee and regulate those types of things.
Everybody has jurisdictions. I totally understand.
Yes,
ma'am. All right. Next one. People can be shut off on the first day when the temperature is over 32 degrees?
outside, so they'll look at a 72-hour window. So if today is 32 and tomorrow is 28, and then the next day is 35, I could be shut off today. Does that make sense? They look 72 hours out. So at any point in the next 72-hour period, if it goes above 32 degrees, you could be shut off.
Great.
Does that make sense? I know it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, there's a lot, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't ever rely on that protection. Like I said, it was really put into place to protect folks from like utilities shutting them off before a huge, like, we know for the next like 2 weeks there's going to be 10 feet of snow outside. You know, we know it's going to be below 32. They were trying to stop people from being shut off before those moments. It's not really to protect people over the winter time.
Right.
I wouldn't count on it.
Good advice. All right, last one. Are you making a video about how people can fill out OHEP applications correctly and completely on their own?
Laurel, is that you? Yes, we are. So right now we, because there are so many issues with folks filling things out properly, because it can be confusing and because the documents especially can be tricky. Right now, OPC in conjunction with Energy Advocates is pulling together a couple-minute video to kind of talk about the tips from a consumer-facing side of things that we're going to be sending out. Also within Wide Angle Youth Media, they're the ones that are going to be producing it. So once we have that information, that video ready and set to go, we'll be sending out to sort of like, we have like an email blast list. If you want to be on that list, email me and I'll add you. We send out stuff like this. I don't know, I probably send something out weekly, bi-weekly, occasionally, depending on what it is, covering all different types of resources. But yes, we are making a video that'll be consumer facing, trying to focus it towards like social based things. So how to find an application, how to fill it out, how to get it right the first time is sort of the goal of the video.
Great, that sounds like it'll be really helpful.
We're hoping so.
Well, Brandy, there are a ton of messages in the chat box about how great this presentation was, how critical this information is, and I really echo the thanks and really appreciate you being here with us today. Again, this will be recorded and will be on Cash Academy so that we can make sure everybody is getting this critical information. Please, everyone on this call, make sure you're spreading this out to your coworkers, your friends, your family, and make sure that people are getting this information out. So thank you so much for this presentation. And with that, we will end this. And I hope everybody stays safe and we will get the information out to everyone afterwards.
All right. Thanks so guys. Much. Bye.